General Ryan, Putin is preparing for a war that could last until at least 2028. That is one of the scenarios identified by Andrei Kovalenko, head of Ukraine's Center for Countering Disinformation. And it would almost certainly require another major wave of mobilization in Russia, well, the hidden wave. So, General Ryan, what does 2028 actually mean in Putin's calculations? Does he genuinely believe that if he keeps throwing enough men and money into this war, eventually Ukraine or the West altogether will break first?
Well, I think this is an important message that Putin wants people in the West and people in Ukraine to believe that Russia is more than willing to continue fighting for several years to come. He hopes that that message alone will break the will, the political will in Ukraine and among its supporters. Just the thought of another 2 years of war, he hopes will see Western countries reconsider their support for Ukraine. I think he believes that Russia also has the capacity to do this. This is partially because of its side, but partially because I don't think he's getting all the factual information from his most senior military commanders. It's hard to see what large numbers of Russian men on the front line could do at the moment rather than be killed by artillery and drones.
Right, but at the same time, they're more and more often attacking Ukrainian cities using this moment when we don't have in Ukraine enough of air defense. So maybe they don't have any gains on the battlefield, as you said, but they can do much more damage and pain and death in Ukrainian cities, especially in Ukrainian capital.
Well, they're doing that and been doing it for some time now. The lack of interceptors and their consumption in wars in Iran and these kind of places is causing even more unnecessary death and suffering for the Ukrainian people. I don't perceive any willingness by the Ukrainian people to use that as a cause to end the war at this point. I think it is the opposite. Ukrainian people, it only hardens their resolve. But nonetheless, it does cause a huge amount of death and suffering and misery amongst the Ukrainian people, which would concern everyone in Ukraine, including the president.
And, okay, if Russia is planning for several more years of war, shouldn't Ukraine's partners be planning on exactly the same timeline, not just considering help, but just, act more precisely? What would a properly coordinated Western strategy actually look like? Not simply, keeping Ukraine alive from one weapons package to the next one, but giving it the capacity to sustain and eventually change the course of this war.
No, I think you're right. If you want to change what's happening on the ground, you have to change how you're thinking in the political capitals in Europe. And I don't know that we're seeing change at the speed that it's required. There has been change, and we have to acknowledge that. The significant change in spending and these kind of things in Eastern European and Central European countries is a real thing, but it just hasn't been fast enough. And frankly, it's not clear that European countries do have the backbone to stand up to Putin, even against these small kind of provocations like the armed drone that Russians sent against a plane at a German airport in the last week. So there is a requirement for new thinking, there is a requirement for more resources, and there is a requirement for a greater deterrent effect from NATO to, really force Putin to end this war and to not engage in aggression against other bits of Europe at the same time.
I just saw the recent interview of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, where he said to the journalist that if only the United States could give, not to give, but sell to Ukraine at least 5% of its air defense, we can at least protect our cities. And if it could be at 10% of the air defense and interceptors, we could completely protect and neutralize all the Russian ballistic missiles flying towards our Ukrainian heads. Is that even possible and achievable at this stage?
Well, I think we need to assume that Patriot missile inventories, which is the really key interceptor that Ukraine lacks at the moment, are significantly degraded, not just in American stockpiles, but in the stockpiles of many countries in the Middle East who had large numbers of these interceptors in their war stocks. And American warplanes, not just for Europe, but also for the Pacific, call for large numbers of these stocks. And it may well be that America now has much fewer missiles of Patriot type than it needs for even one contingency in the Pacific. So I think in the short term, unfortunately, it's unlikely that America will provide more Patriot interceptors, but I would love to be surprised pleasantly with America coming to the party and selling more interceptors to Ukraine.
Yeah, not very optimistic, but I want to elaborate on that one a bit. Putin appears, according to Newsweek, Putin appears to be preparing for another escalation in Ukraine. So, as we said and discussed, more ballistic missiles, potentially tens of thousands more North Korean troops, and possibly another mobilization inside Russia. Is Putin raising the stakes in Ukraine because America's distraction in the Middle East, or the air defense shortage on Ukraine, as we discussed, or future Gosduma elections, or future mobilization?
Well, I think Putin is exploiting what he sees as a couple of opportunities right now. He's not a strategist, but he is an opportunist. He sees an opportunity at the moment with the shortfall in ballistic missile interceptors to cause more pain against the Ukrainian people, which he hopes will cause additional political schisms inside Ukraine. But he also sees an opportunity because he perceives that America is weak, that America doesn't want to be involved in Europe. It's not likely to push back against expanded Russian militarism and aggression against Ukraine and Europe itself. So I think he's testing not just Ukraine even more than he has, he's also testing European countries with this step up in drones, in subversion, in sabotage across the European continent, because he perceives, and potentially with some justification, that President Trump, Vice President Vance and many others just want to walk away from Europe and Ukraine and focus on China. They want to get out of the Middle East. They haven't been able to do that. It's very unlikely that they'll be able to walk away from Europe and Ukraine as well.
Right. Yeah, I was reading a long time ago that Putin is not a strategist, but he's a rather tactician.
Yes, that's correct. He's an opportunist. He's not a chess player. He plays judo, but he's still extraordinarily dangerous. And as former Commander-in-Chief Zaluzhny said a short time ago, we should never assume that Russia has lost. We must always treat them as a very dangerous adversary.
As long as we mentioned, General Ryan, North Korea, how profound a shift do you see in this, Moscow-Pyongyang relationship? Could this become a genuinely long-term military partnership, or it already is? And what new threats could that create for Ukraine over the next several years?
Well, this has been a partnership of many decades. The Russians helped the North Koreans in their war against America, South Korea, Australia, the British Commonwealth during the 1950s. So I think it's only natural that North Korea would assist Russia with manpower, with many munitions. Some of the ballistic missiles falling on Ukrainian cities are from North Korea, because they're also learning from this. It's improving the North Korean military, and that should be of very deep concern to America and to South Korea, neither of whom seem to be making a lot of noise about that at the moment, but they really should be. The North Koreans coming to Ukraine, fighting in Ukraine, is in no one's interests. They are brutal soldiers, and they should not be in Europe. We should be doing more to prevent them from coming into Europe and fighting there.
So if Russia can increase missile production faster than the West can increase interceptor production, what exactly is the strategy?
Well, it's hard to see, because for every missile that Russia fires at Ukraine, generally you need to send a couple of interceptors at it. So you don't need to match Russian missile production with interceptor production. You need 2 or 3 times as much interceptor production than what the Russians are producing missiles. I think Ukraine has hedged its bets with the development of an indigenous missile interceptor, the Freya project that's ongoing in collaboration with Europe, but that's still going to take many months, probably not until 2027, until there's a proof of concept. So for the next 6 months, unless the Americans can change their policy and do an emergency shipment of Patriot interceptor missiles to Ukraine, I think it's going to be very difficult to stop this barrage of Russian ballistic missiles. The thing we should also keep in mind is that Putin may overstep here. He may cause even such a level of destruction and death and misery amongst Ukrainian people that some of those who even support him may seek to restrain him. That's got to be part of the strategy to stop this rain of ballistic missiles on Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. At the beginning of summer, I was reading the interview from the Firepoint company that Freya could be ready only at the end of 2027. So that's a long way. Maybe earlier, I don't know.
Yeah, these are some of the most sophisticated weapons on the face of the earth. They are very, very complex, and to build one from a standing start like this is a very difficult undertaking, unfortunately.
General Ryan, at the same time, there are signs of a growing domestic pressure on Putin. From what I'm reading, his approval ratings has reportedly fallen, and he has suddenly become much more visible, touring Russian regions in a way we haven't seen for a long time. Do you see this as a genuine political vulnerability, or is it far too early to talk about Putin losing control at home?
No, I think this is just one of those periodic phases we see where people think he's vulnerable and he's less popular at home. The reality is he doesn't care how popular he is. He runs the country, has 25 years to reinforce and secure his position with multiple layers of economic and security protection. I mean, he plays the role of an elected populist, but the reality is he's not, and we shouldn't really plan for any kind of removal of Putin from the scene anytime soon. We have to assume he's going to be there for the long term, and we have to deal with him and the facts as they are, not as we might wish they would be.
And speaking about the interceptors, President Trump is once again blaming Joe Biden for giving too much American ammunition to Ukraine. Perhaps that argument carried some political weight in 2025 before he came to the Oval Office again. But after the war with Iran, together with Israel, the United States itself has reportedly burned through nearly 80% of its THAAD interceptors and roughly half of its Patriot missiles. So at what point does blaming Biden stop being an explanation?
I don't think there's any serious military or political expert who takes that excuse from President Trump seriously. It's not a serious explanation for what's happened here. It's a cover your backside kind of explanation from a president who's wasted a huge amount of munitions on an unnecessary war against Iran. Indeed, Ukraine's use of the Patriot weapons system has provided a massive amount of information to the US military on the optimal ways of using this defence system, on how the Russian tactics are being adapted to get around it. So, I mean, Ukraine has given back to America just as much as it's got with regards to air defence systems.
And General Ryan, there are also some good news to talk about. Ukraine has just carried out one of its most successful strikes on Novorossiysk, hitting Russian warships, including vessels capable of carrying Kalibr cruise missiles. At the same time, Ukrainian deep strikes are increasingly targeting the logistics that sustain Russia's war. That's fuel infrastructure, that's transport hubs and major warehouses, including the Wildberries network. So should Ukraine now double down on this strategy, and how do you assess this strategy?
Well, I think Ukraine has a broad approach to its strategic targeting. It has to target energy and degrade Russian oil production. It's done a pretty good job of that. I mean, it's really reduced Russian incomes and access of Russians to fuel. It also has to target logistics and military logistics. The Wildberries warehouses are part of that, as are defence industrial factories, and then very significant strategic military targets, whether they're air defence or missile launches, like these ships that were targeted in the attacks over the last 48 hours. So Ukraine just can't pick one kind of target. It's got to have a broad range of targets and attack them over the widest possible area to make Russia deploy air defences all over the place, which creates gaps that subsequent Ukrainian attacks can penetrate. So, I think what Ukraine has done is built this very sophisticated long-range strike capability with supporting weapons over the last 4 years that the rest of the world should be watching and learning from.
And also there is another interesting contradiction here. According to the Financial Times, Vice President J.D. Vance asked President Zelensky to stop Ukrainian strikes on tanker around Novorossiysk carrying Kazakh crude through the Caspian pipeline consortium, partially because American companies have major interests there. And Ukraine reportedly complied. How do you assess that request militarily?
Well, clearly, the Long-Range Strike Command decided, well, if we can't hit oil tankers, we'll just hit the warships at the same location instead. Which shows that there's a real innovative and adaptive spirit in the Ukrainian military. It's unfortunate the Americans would tie one of Ukraine's hands behind its backs like this. It doesn't benefit Ukraine. It may benefit American companies. And I'd love to see a quid pro quo from the Americans. If they ask Ukraine not to strike these oil tankers, maybe that should come with a few Patriot missile interceptors.
I'm going to continue on a very not optimistic topic, but we have to raise it up. Ukrainian servicemen who survived Russian captivity spoke at the UN Security Council about systematic abuse and torture and sexual violence, but many people never survived Russian captivity at all, military personnel and civilians alike. Russia is not simply violating the rules of governing prisoners of war. It has repeatedly denied meaningful international monitoring and actually access to detainees. And yet the international response still seems, remarkably passive. General Ryan, why do you think the world has tolerated this for so long? Why has Russia been allowed to effectively shut international institutions out while Ukrainian prisoners, as well as the foreign nationals who fought alongside Ukrainian side, are subjected to horrific treatment?
Yeah, this is an issue, I've spoken to different people in Ukraine about during various visits. I mean, it's a very disturbing part of Russia's systemic efforts to extinguish the Ukrainian nation. It is using these prisoner of war camps, and I use that term loosely, that it generally puts former criminals who have done a little bit of military service in charge of. So already you have a huge latitude for abuse to occur, and it encourages systemic abuse and torture in sexual abuse, in having prisoners fight for food. I mean, the level and the depravity of the Russian abuse of Ukrainian and other prisoners of war is abysmal. And the United Nations, Amnesty International and other so-called humanitarian organisations should be calling this out more. And Ukraine's supporters should be calling Russia out more for this kind of abuse. This is just not on. It is not how you treat prisoners of war. Ukraine has been very open with how it does so. Its soldiers are generally pretty compassionate with the Russians they do capture, which is quite remarkable given what Russia's doing to Ukraine. Yeah. But the Russian approach to the treatment of Ukrainian prisoners of war is systemic. It has the support of the authorities, and ultimately Putin is responsible for this.
Absolutely. General Ryan, there is one thing I forgot to ask you about, Donald Trump and the United States. One of our viewers made an interesting point in the comments. He suggested that if President Trump remains increasingly focused on the war with Iran, Ukraine might actually have a better chance of winning Russia's war. At first, that sounds, counterintuitive because American attention and military resources are being pulled towards the Middle East. But I wondered whether there might be actually some truth to it, particularly given how closely Iran and Russia have supported each other militarily. How much do you agree with that argument?
I mean, there's some irony in that argument that if Donald Trump pays no attention to Ukraine, Ukraine might do better. But ultimately, we would love the United States of America to provide additional munitions to support Ukraine. The intelligence it provides, the training it provides under the leadership of people like General Buzzard, who's just retired, has been superb and should be recognised. But, I think there's room for additional US support, particularly with ballistic missile interceptors and other weapons that might be useful. So we'd like Donald Trump to pay attention to Ukraine in a very positive way, if indeed that can be managed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, General Ryan, I think at the end of this conversation and interview, I would like to ask you about, there is a growing talks in the media that Russia will attack NATO countries sooner or later. And from what I'm reading, it's going to be sooner. So what separates a hybrid war from a full-scale war between NATO countries and Russia?
Well, I think, the term hybrid war isn't very useful. War is about using violence to achieve political ends. You can use any kind of other descriptor you want, but Russia's been at war with NATO for many years now. It's been using violence, it's been using poison, it's been using explosives and explosive drones against European targets, and it would like nothing better than to test the unity of NATO in a small attack on a small country that it would hope that most European countries and Americans just go, it's not worth the effort to, provoke Russia by defending this country. That's what Putin wants to do. He wants to destroy America's alliances, just as China does. An attack on an Eastern European NATO member might be the way he seeks to achieve that.
General Ryan, thank you for your perspective on the current stage of the Russia's war in Ukraine and this global picture. Thank you so much and see you next time.
Thanks, Natalie. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.